Well, like I said, we had a lot of fun. We had already looking forward to Edge 2021. As weird as that sounds, it'll be here soon. And we took 10, and next time we're gonna take 20 or 30. So, and they were already asking me when we left, we're coming back next year, right? We're coming back next year. So we survived on caffeine and sugar while we were down there. The adults, the kids were just, they're on pure energy. So. It reminded me that you can feel young and old at the same time. Dawson came out of the first worship service and he goes, "That was lit." And I was like, "What is that?" That's good. That's getting me so excited. At the same time, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I ran up 15 flights of stairs. We walked 7 miles." I was like, "Oh, it's hard. It's hard." So, but we had a lot of fun. So there was many messages taught down there over our couple days that we were there. They had breakout Bible study sessions, and we had worship, and every worship service there was a message that was taught, and many different things were touched upon. But a common thread was that the fact that our kids today are faced with a lot of things that we did not have to face at their age. They are exposed to the world at a much faster pace than we were, with social media and the exposure to the commercials and things like that now. And it presents a challenge for them. And they are going to be expected to overcome a lot in their life. Has anybody ever had to overcome anything in their life? Anybody at all? No? Nobody? All right. Yeah? Yeah. We all have, right? We've all had different trials and struggles and things that we have to overcome, and there's no doubt in my mind that almost everybody in here is fighting something now. They're trying to overcome something now. So I was reminded of this, speaking of social media, somebody posted on Facebook. It was funny but true. It was like a little cartoon of a man giving a young boy a bicycle. And he said, here's a bicycle, I got you. Congratulations on graduating high school. And in front of the boy on the bicycle was this mountain that went straight up, and he couldn't see the top. And he said, "Thank you." He goes, "What's at the top?" He goes, "Death." So life is an uphill battle, right? That was the story. And this kid was like, "Oh my gosh." So life's a struggle. It can be. We have our ups and downs, but no doubt we'll be asked to face and to overcome some stuff. So today I've entitled the message, "The Strategy of an Overcomer." And we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17, because there are many overcomers in Scripture. But one of the best was David. David, in this story that we're going to look at, overcame a mighty foe. And it was the first of many things that David was going to have to overcome. Some of his own choosing and some not. David made some very bad decisions, but he creates an excellent example for us in this account that we're going to look at in 1 Samuel chapter 17. This is the age-old story. A historical, I hate to even call it a story because it happened. A factual event of David versus Goliath. We hear it all the time, in children's church and stuff, and we hear about how David slayed the giant with nothing but a slingshot and a stone. So we're going to look at it today. We're going to look at it afresh, and I'm convinced that what it meant for our students down there will apply to each and everybody here, because we're all, as long as we're this side of the earth and we're breathing, we've got obstacles to overcome, and that's why I want to look at David. So one of the biggest hindrances to overcoming anything is comparing yourself to other people. Thinking that I'm not good enough. I'll never be as good as that person. That person's so much better at X, Y, and Z than I am. They've got more money, they've got nicer clothes, they've got more education, they've got a better personality, they look better, they got a nicer car. It's without end that we can compare ourselves to other people. And so there's an infinite number of categories that we can do this, and almost an infinite number of people that we can compare ourselves to. And now that we're flooded by social media, especially our young people, it's easy than ever to constantly find someone better to compare yourself to. To which it only serves to make us feel bad about ourselves. And it's truly a struggle for our young people today. They feel like they're never living up. They're always falling short of the person they're trying to compare themselves to. And then once we begin down that road, it's a road that never finds an end. And it's going to end nowhere good. You're going to end up just really being hard on yourself. I'm naturally my own worst critic. I do this. I criticize myself over everything. I can always do this better. I can always do that better. I can always do this more. But here's why that's not fair. There's several reasons why. Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. And it is. When you compare yourself to other people, it steals your joy. It takes your eyes off who God made you and how God created you and how God gifted you. We're all gifted in different ways, but we've all got gifts. We've all got callings, none of which is more important than the other. Paul talked about that. None of which is more important than the other. But there's 5 reasons here that I want to talk about. Comparisons are always unfair. They're always unfair. Here's why. Because we typically compare the worst that we know of ourselves to the best that we presume about other people. I like to say it like this. We know the backstage act of us, right? We know what goes on when nobody else is looking. We know what we struggle with. We know where we fail. We know where we falter. We know that. But we compare that to everybody's best face, right? When we meet them, when we see them, it's always they put their best face on, right? They're always fixed up. We only see that side of other people. We don't see the side where they struggle. So it's an unfair comparison. We know who we are in and out, but we only get to see the best of everybody else. And when we compare ourselves to that way, it's not fair. Comparisons rob us of our precious time. When you focus on somebody else, how you're never going to be as good as them, it does nothing for you but rob you of your time and your joy. The fact of the matter is that you are too unique to compare fairly. You're too special. You're too significant in your own way to compare to somebody else. Your gifts and talents and success and contributions and value are entirely unique to you and your purpose in this world, and they can never be accurately compared to somebody else. Can't be done. Hannah read that verse from Luke where it talks about that the Lord knows the number of hairs on your head. He's created you in a specific, unique, detailed way that you're going to be for Him, for His kingdom, and it's not fair to compare you to somebody else who's gifted in a different way. Somebody who has different strengths than you do, because you have strengths that they don't have. Comparison puts the focus on the wrong person. When you're looking at somebody else, comparing yourself, you're looking at the wrong person. Because when you are in Christ, you look to Christ for your motivation. That's who you compare yourself to. That's who you strive to be. That's who you focus on. That's how you become like Him. You take your eyes off everybody else and you put it on Him and on Him alone. Comparison deprives us of joy. It adds no value, meaning, or fulfillment to our lives. It only distracts us. I venture to guess that we're all guilty in some sense of comparing ourselves to other people. And it's a natural fault that most of us have. But the story we're going to look at today would not exist if David did this. If David compared himself to other people because of the way they looked or the strength that they have, we would not have 1 Samuel 17 in our Bible today. The fact of the matter is that like David, we need to put our value on who we are, not on who we are or how someone else is, but we begin to put our value in who Jesus Christ is. When we begin to value who Jesus Christ is and we try to live like Him and we focus on Him, then that changes the way we are, it changes our focus, and it gives us the ability to overcome whatever it is that comes our way. Whatever it is that comes our way. When our eyes are on Jesus and we know our strength is in Him, He is the only one who makes us an overcomer in that sense. The fact of the matter is, like Connor said, we can only truly learn who we are when we learn who Jesus is. That's it. You'll never know who you are when you're in Christ. When you pray and you believe on Him for your salvation, your old self is crucified to the cross, is what the Bible says. It is nailed to a cross. Put away, dead. Dead as dead can be, and you'll never know what that new creation is until you focus on Jesus, the one that gave it to you. And that's what happens. That's the only way that you can truly live the life that God has called you to live for Jesus. So instead of doing things the old way, valuing other people that we look to try to be like, we should change the way we live and shape who we become by looking at Jesus, because this is the new way. When you put on that new self, when you are that new creation that the Bible talks about, that is the way to live it. You focus on Jesus, and He becomes your strength. So Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 through 13. So what's going on here? His authority as an apostle has been challenged. There were some false teachers that came to Corinth and told the church, which Paul had already settled, that all that stuff Paul taught you, that don't even believe it, because he's not a true apostle. He's weak in appearance. He's timid when he speaks. He's not even a good speaker in public. But these people, these people that wore better clothes, that Paul refers to them facetiously as super apostles. That they were the ones that had the true message. But Paul says to the Corinthians when he writes this letter, he says, but they, those people, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. Because they're comparing themselves to everybody else. Their value is in what everybody else values. Better clothes, better pedigree, better resume, better speakers. But they are not wise, he says, because we, however, will not boast beyond measure, but within the limits of the sphere which God has appointed us. Paul knew that God had appointed him to be an apostle. Paul knew that. Paul says, I may not be a great speaker, but what I have to say, God told me to say. And I'll say it until I have no breath left in me. And he says that we dare not compare ourselves to these quote-unquote super apostles, because they're false teachers, is what he says. That God does not value the outward appearance or the prominence that the world does, but God values truth. And he says, I will not boast outside of what God has given me. So Paul teaches us a very, very important example there. But in 1 Samuel chapter 17, we see a story of David. The story of David who overcome here a great and mighty foe. We're going to talk about how big he is. We're going to talk about some of the things that happened. And hopefully you have a better understanding of how all this unfolded when today is done. So I'm going to start. 1 Samuel chapter 17, we're going to start in verse 1. It says, Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Soko and Azekah and Ephes-Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah. And they drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley in between. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So a cubit, here I've got a little visual illustration for you. A cubit, anybody know how big a cubit is? About 18 inches. So what they did is they said it's the length of somebody's elbow to the tip of their middle finger. And it's right out about 18 inches for me. So that's a cubit. So if you want to really mess with people, start doing measurements in cubits. Need 3 cubits of lumber. You're about 2 cubits tall. That kind of thing. But that's how. So he was 6 cubits in a span. A span, from what I could find out, was about 6 to 9 inches. So if a cubit is 1.5 feet and there's 6 of them, he was about 9.5 feet tall. Goliath, 9.5 feet tall. So this is 3 feet. So then we got about 6 feet right here. Then we got about 9 feet. Well, he couldn't fit in here. He would have to drop his head down to even come in the door. So if he's 9 feet 9 inches tall, a standard basketball goal is 10 feet tall. Dude could probably dunk a basketball. You know what you think? Pretty easy, right? He's a big guy. Big dude. So this was no small man. He made Andre the Giant look tiny. So Goliath, very, very big guy. So he was about 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and was armed with a coat of mail. So this armor, this stuff that he wore, and it said that the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. Another interesting measure. So 5,000 shekels of bronze weighs about 125 pounds. So he wore a vest that was about 125 pounds. I didn't ask in the first service about who may weigh 125 pounds, but some of you in here may be that small. That would be the equivalent of Goliath wearing you as a coat. He's a big dude. Wears 125 pounds worth of armor on his chest. It goes on to say that he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of the spear was like a weaver's beam. So this would have been like 2 to 3 inches in diameter, this big spear that he carried. And the spearhead on it weighed 600 shekels of iron. And a shield bearer went before him. So 600 shekels of iron was about 15 pounds. So the spear on Goliath's, the tip of Goliath's spear weighed about 15 pounds. So, I mean, it's a big dude. Big spear. Lots of big things going on. He was supersized. Lots of stuff happening there. Your shot put weighs about 15, 16 pounds. Those are very heavy. Goliath could probably chuck that spear pretty far. So then, as big as he is, and roughly, so back then, it is believed that the average height of a person, 5.5 feet tall, not very tall, but Goliath was almost double that. Goliath probably weighed about 400 pounds, not counting the armor that he wore. And not only that, when he went out, he didn't go by himself, but he had a shield bearer in front of him. So somebody that stood and held a shield in front of him as he went out to taunt the Israelites, as we're about to see. So then he stood and he cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose now a man for yourselves and let him come down to me." So there's something that happens right here. We're going to see when we compare this to what David says. But Goliath sees them as servants of who? Saul. He said, "Are you not the Israelites, servants of Saul?" But in verse 26, David says, "We are the army of the living God." They're not servants of Saul; they're God's servants. And Goliath did not know this. He did not understand this. It was never a fair fight from the beginning, but he didn't know it. "So choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." He says, "I call you out today. Give me somebody, and I'll wipe the floor with him," essentially. "I'll kill him," is what he says. And when Saul and Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. You got some 9.5 foot dude, 400 plus pounds, calling you out? Yeah, I'm probably going to be a little bit dismayed. Probably going to be greatly afraid, unless I've got a firearm on me. Quick story. I pulled over a car one time for speeding on the interstate, and I walk up there, and there's 4 dudes in there that is massive. Like 6'5", 360, 370 pounds. Find out they're Cincinnati Bengals football players on the way. They're late for curfew. This is when they used to have spring training at Georgetown. And I'm out here on the interstate by myself. It's like one of these dudes bucks up. I'm just going to shoot him because I can't find somebody that big. It's just me for them. So I kind of know what needs to happen. David, David was fighting a much bigger dude than that. So I was like, luckily they were very polite, respectful, and they took their ticket and went on. So, but yes, I would have been just a little taste of what that may feel like. So he said, "I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." And Saul and Israel heard these words and were dismayed. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons, and the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle, so they were soldiers. The names of these 3 sons who went to battle were Eliab the firstborn, so Eliab's the oldest. The second oldest was Abinadab, and the third Shammah. I don't know for the life of me why Abinadab is not a common name today. It just seems like it would be a good one. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So what's happening here is that David had already been anointed to be the new king of Israel. Saul had already messed up. Samuel came and found Jesse It said, one of your sons, the Lord has told me to anoint to be the king of Israel, the next king of Israel. David was that one. It's already happened. But he has not fulfilled, he has not become the king yet. So after that, Saul begins to suffer from these kind of mental breakdowns. He's got an illness going on. And he says that the only way that these can be calmed is by somebody who can play the harp. And they say, well, Jesse has a son that can play the harp. And Saul says, well, get him. So David would come and play the harp for Saul to kind of soothe him and calm him down. So this has already happened here. But now that Saul is on the front lines with the army, there's no sense in David staying there to play the harp because Saul's not there. So he goes back home to Bethlehem to be with his dad, to be the shepherd that he was before he was anointed and went to Saul's kingdom. So that's what happened so far. David would occasionally went back, returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine then would draw near and present himself, and he did this for 40 days, morning and evening. So every day, morning and evening, Goliath would come out, and he would challenge, he would taunt, he would mock the Israelites. So this was the setting for this. I've never been to Jerusalem or to the area, but the Valley of Elah is apparently still there. They believe this is where it happened. It's about 100 yards from one ridge to the other. So the Israelites would stand on one ridge, the Philistines would stand on the other. There was a valley that separated them. They were about a football length field apart from each other. And he would come out every day, morning and evening, and taunt them and call them names and call them out to send somebody out to fight him. So this had gone on for 40 days. And let's see, here we are. Lost my place again. But David occasionally went and returned to Saul to feed his sheep. Then Jesse, this is verse 17, then Jesse said to his son David, take now your brothers an ephah of dried grain and these 10 loaves and run to your brothers at the camp and carry these 10 cheeses to their captains, lost my place again, to their captains of their 1,000 and see how your brothers fare and bring back news of them. So basically what happens is that Jesse sends, so 40 days have passed. Jesse now wants to know how his older three sons are doing. He knows there's a war. He's concerned about them. So he says, David, here, I want you to take this bread and this cheese to the captain. I want you to go check on them and take this to him, kind of like a care package, if you will. So I kind of picture it as David comes with like his cheese and crackers platter to the front line. So he's bringing this to them. And now Saul and all the men of Israel were in the Valley of Elah fighting the Philistines. So that's what he finds when he gets there. He's been gone for 40 days. He doesn't really know what's going on. But he's coming back, and he's got his meat and cheese platter, his crackers and cheese. And he comes up, and then as he gets there, he sees the Israelites marching off to battle. And he's like, what's going on? What's happening here? So this part right here, we're going to see David, the first point that I want you to know, and your strategy to be an overcomer. You have to refuse to be discouraged by others. You have to refuse to be discouraged by others. And we're going to see what that looks like in verses 20 through verse 30. So, David rose early in the morning, and he left his sheep with the keeper. And he took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hands of the supply keeper and ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers. So he gets there, sees them going off to battle. He leaves his cheese and crackers with the quartermaster, the guy runs off to find his older brothers. He's like, hey, what's going on? So then he gets there, he says, then he talked with them, and there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines and spoke according to the same words, so David heard them. So this was Goliath's daily taunt. He comes out, he is now coming out to taunt them as they march off to battle again, but this is the first time that David had heard this. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, were dreadfully afraid. So for 40 days, this must have been how this happened. Every day they would walk out to battle. They would send Goliath out. Goliath would come out, taunt them and mock them. And for 40 days, day and night, they would run away in fear. That was kind of the standard, I guess. And Saul was back there wringing his hands, wondering, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Everybody I got's chicken. Verse 25. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. Verse 26, one of my favorite verses in this whole story. Then David spoke to the men who stood before him and stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? You know what that tells us? That for thousands of years, young men have been doing crazy things for a good-looking woman. He goes, wait a second. Saul's going to give what and do what for whoever kills that uncircumcised Philistine? I get to marry his daughter, and even better than that, I don't got to pay taxes? So David's like, oh, okay, all right, I like the way that sounds. So we go on to verse 27. And the people answered him in this manner and said, yeah, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. So David's like, oh my gosh, I get to marry the king's daughter and I don't have to pay taxes again if I kill this uncircumcised Philistine? And David's thinking, well, I'm your huckleberry. Yeah, I'm ready to go. So now Eliab, his oldest brother, so here's what happens. So David is now inquiring about what the price is for killing Goliath. He's like, so say that again now? Like, seriously, we get this. So Eliab hears this, and he goes to David. Now he's mad, because Eliab, David's oldest brother, says, when he spoke to the men, Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? So then he turned from him again toward another and said the same thing, and these people answered him as the first ones did. So Eliab hears David questioning what the people get, what the man that kills Goliath gets, and he gets mad. What are you even doing down here, David? What are you even doing? Aren't you supposed to be watching the sheep? I know you. You just came down here to watch a fight. So why? And then David's reply is a typical younger sibling. What'd I do? I don't get it. What I do? You know Eliab's been putting up with David's garbage his whole life. I mean, if anybody's got younger siblings, you kind of know how that goes. So Eliab's like, I know you. You just came down here to watch a fight. But why would Eliab be mad about David doing this? Because Eliab had stood there like a coward for 40 days. And he wasn't going to fight Goliath, but now his little brother comes up, and he's like, I'll do it. I get a woman and no taxes, I'm in. So Eliab gets mad and says, what are you even doing here? I know you. And then David just like, what I do? And then he turns around and goes back to the other group. Seriously, do we get the king and do we get the king's daughter no taxes? That's what he said. He asked him again, and they told him the same thing again. So David has to ask this like 3 times. So now, it's verse 31. When the words which David spoke were heard and reported to them, Saul, and he sent for him. So what happened here is that they hear David questioning. The other soldiers hear David questioning about their reward. And they basically go to Saul and they say, hey Saul, some little guy back there, he sounds interested in what you're offering to fight Goliath. And Saul says basically, well, bring him to me. So that's what happens. And we're going to get into the second point in just a second. But look at what happened to David when he stood up. When he said, I'll do it. I'll fight the Philistine. His own brother said, you're crazy. What are you doing? So when you decide to be a champion for God, you set yourself up for some heat and some criticism. You don't think that everybody's going to be your biggest cheerleader. In fact, what you may find is that some of the closest ones, the closest people to you say, you can't do that. No, you can't. You're crazy. Go back to doing what it is you do. And that's true. You can never expect to have everybody in your camp if you step out to do something for God. The fact may be that they don't have enough courage themselves to do it, and they don't want you to do it either. They weren't brave enough to do it like Eliab weren't, so you shouldn't be brave enough to do it. You're making me look bad. Go back to what you do. Notice, though, throughout this whole story, how the Bible describes Goliath by his physical attributes, how big he was. How much his armor weighed, how big his spear was, but it describes David the whole time by his spiritual attributes. How much faith David had. How David knew that the army was the army of the living God. And that's a big deal. So the second step in overcoming, to being an overcomer, the strategy is reinforce your focus on God and reflect on your previous victories. Reinforce your focus on God and reflect on your previous victories. We're going to see that in verses 31 through 37, what that looks like. So now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing that he has defied the armies of the living God." Moreover, David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." So when Saul tells David, "Young man, I appreciate the sentiment, but you can't do this. You're a young man. You're small. You're tiny. And you're just a kid. He's been a warrior since he was a kid. He's twice the size. You can't do this." And David says instead, he says, "No, I kept my father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear would come take the lamb, I would go snatch that lamb out of their mouth. And if they turned on me, I would grab them by the beard and I would club them in the head. And I'd kill them." And he says that God will do the same thing for that Philistine for me. David remembered how God had delivered him in the past. David did not forget how God had allowed him to overcome some pretty serious foes already. And you know what we're guilty of a lot of times? We completely forget how God's delivered us in the past when something new happens. Yes. Some new trial, some new struggle comes and we get a case of the ain't it awfuls. Ain't it awfuls, Lord, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know. I don't know. And He, all the while, He's never failed you. He's brought you through it. But we forget that. We forget that too fast. But David remembered how God had delivered him. And he knew that God would deliver him again. God has been there for me before and He'll be there for me again, is what David's telling Saul. And I'm ready. I'm ready for this. So now, third point. David teaches us to run toward your problems, not away from them. That's your third point and strategy to overcome it. Run toward your problems, not away from them. So we're going to pick up in verse 38. So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword on the armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them." So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and a sling in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. So I had never thought of this before, but while we were there, the pastor brought up a point. Saul tried to put David in his armor. And David put it on, and he said, this stuff, remember, Saul's a big dude. Saul was head and shoulders above everybody else. David's a little guy. He puts it on, and David can't even walk in it. Emma, come up here. So, this is my body armor for work. This is not one size fits all. This is custom fit for me because it protects all the important parts when I'm out there. But I need to be able to move in it. If I got to chase somebody, I need to be able to chase anybody. I don't do that anymore because I'm a boss now, so I'm chasing anybody. So if I put this on Emma, little Emma, all right. So now Emma's all ready for war, right? Ready for battle. Are you going to be able to chase anybody or fight anybody very well in that? Come on, why not? See what happens? See, that's hard, isn't it? It's meant to protect you. But that's my armor. That's not hers. That's not what she's used to. She'd fight you with some slime. So that's not what she's used to. God's equipped her a different way than He's equipped me. And she can't wear my armor to battle. And that's what, sit down, baby, good job. And that's what David tried to do. That Saul said, put this on, and David said, I can't put that on, that's not me. I'm a shepherd. I'm a shepherd. God has taught me how to be a shepherd. And he grabbed his staff and his little slingshot and 5 smooth stones out of the creek, and he said, I'm going to fight the Philistine. So then he takes his staff in his hand, his 5 smooth stones, verse 41. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. So he's marching that 100 yards, getting closer and closer. And I imagine that David realizes Goliath's getting bigger and bigger as he gets closer. So I can only imagine the prayers that are going up right then. So the Philistine came. He began drawing near to David. The man bore the shield, went before him. So he's got his shield bearer too. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, which means that he curled his lip at him. And he says, for he was only a youth, ruddy but good looking. I like how the Bible, I think David had something to do with this part, making sure that got in there. He was ruddy, but he was good looking. So the Philistine said to David, this is what Goliath says, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Because he's got his staff. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. The challenge is extended. David says to the Philistine, you mean you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin? But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of armies of Israel. You have defied. You have defied the Lord, is what David says. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you, and I will take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. So David says, I'll see you giving my carcasses to the birds of the air, and I'll raise you and your whole camp. I'll give them the whole camp, the birds of the air, that in the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands. So David has just written a check with his mouth that hopefully his butt can cash, right? He has said it. It's out there, and now we're going to see what happens. So it was that the Philistine arose and drew near to meet David. So now he's angered. He's just angered the biggest bully on the block. Goliath's coming at him. Fight or flight, right? What are we going to do? We're going to turn and run? David probably outrun Goliath, but what does he do? Then David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. David didn't run away from him. He ran right at him. Then David put his hand in his bag, and he took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore, David, making good on his promise about removing his head, David runs and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, so he used Goliath's own sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head. And when the Philistines saw what happened, that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley to the gates of Ekron. And to the wounded Philistines fell along the road of Sharim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. So David brings Goliath's head back to Jerusalem, and he puts Goliath's armor in his tent. Probably for a little war trophy, a little memento. But at that time, I killed the guy twice my size. So David comes back. He's been victorious. The Israelites, of course, now that David's killed Goliath, they're suddenly a lot braver. They'll chase the enemy now, right? The big guy's gone, and we'll chase him. And then the Philistines, now that their big guy's dead, they're all a little bit more scared. They run away. I told them first service, my parents have a dog with the exact same personality, little bitty thing. He's the biggest and baddest thing that you'll ever encounter until you do this toward him and he'll run away. So that's kind of like the Philistines. They were big and bad until somebody backed and then they ran away. When their champion was gone, they failed. And the thing is, all of this happened because David knew who he was and who He was looking toward God for deliverance. He didn't look to himself. If he compared himself to Goliath, he would have never stood toe-to-toe with that guy. But he said in the very beginning, Saul says, "You are the servants of Saul." David says, "We are the army of the living God." David had already been anointed king. Although it's not happened yet, David knew that God was going to take care of him. David knew that God was not going to let him fail. So he said, "I'll do it. I'll do it." Kind of like Abraham. When God said, "Abraham, sacrifice your son Isaac on this altar." But God had promised Abraham to make a great nation from Isaac. So Abraham knew, "God, I don't understand. But I'll do it because you promised me that this was going to happen." And then God delivered him. David the same way. "God, I've been anointed king. It's not happened yet, but I know you got me. I know who I am in you." So the last point, the last one. The last and most important strategy to being an overcomer. Remember for whom you are fighting. We go back to verses 45 to 47. David said to the Philistine, this is key, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear, but I come to you in the name of the host, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. In this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all the assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with a sword or a spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands." If we can remember that part, the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands. That's the key to being an overcomer. That mindset. He will give you, the battle is his, and he will give you into my hands. When you see who you are in Christ, when you see who you are, when you become that new creation, you need to stop comparing yourself to everybody else. Because like I said, if David had compared himself to Goliath, 1 Samuel 17 would not exist. It would go straight from 16 to 18. So that's the message that we wanted our students to know too, that you cannot look at everybody else to find out who you are. You cannot do it. You have to look to Jesus to find out who you are. But as great as this story is, and David is a fantastic overcomer, did you know that he's not the greatest overcomer in the Bible? There's one greater. Jesus. David overcame Goliath, a 9.5-foot tall giant with armor and a spear, but that pales in comparison to what Jesus overcame. Sin, death. He conquered a giant much greater than that. So when we realize that Jesus is the overcomer, capital O, the overcomer, then we can overcome a whole lot. Revelation 21:7 says, "He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." We're going to have an invitation, and when we pray, I want you to really think about that. Do you know the overcomer? Are you fighting your battles on your own? Are you looking to you for your own strength? Are you looking at somebody else about how you want to be or how you want to live? And if you don't know the overcomer, today's the day. Today's the day to find out the overcomer, who the overcomer is, to know him on a personal level, that many of our students, hopefully after this, they understand that he is the overcomer. Or if you do know him, you've been trying to do it on your own, and you need prayer, then please come forward. Well, our prayer partners up here, come and let somebody know what battle you're fighting, what are you struggling with that you need to hand over to God. Help us to help you understand that you are an overcomer because of what he overcame.